I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. Today, I'm excited to have with me a very special guest, Taylor Croissant. Am I going to, can I pronounce it Croissant, or do I have to do the English thing, and Croissant?
I'm good with both.
Okay, sounds good. Taylor has been working and just recently has, I'll call it, completed a book that you've edited called Building God's Beloved Community, Discipleship in the United Church in Canada. I've taken a look through it, and it is a very interesting read. We have a bunch of denominations in Canada, and you've done very well, and your contributors to explaining the United Church and where things are at, and some of the approaches that are currently being taken by your denomination. But I want to let you first introduce yourself, what your ministry journey has been, and then we'll talk a little bit about how denominations are faring in Canada. I think this will be a very interesting time together. So let me start off. Introduce yourself. Who are you? What's your name? What's been your ministry journey? Some of that, so that our listeners can have a sense of who you are.
Sure. I'm Reverend Taylor Croissant. I grew up in Medicine Hat, Alberta. I entered into candidacy for ministry at a very young age. I think it was in my between the summer of my first and second years of university. I
really
said, no, I am definitely called to ministry. Mm-hmm. So even though I'm still relatively young in ministry, I've been around for a very long time. I think I'm considered an old hand in our denomination. I went to school in Saskatoon. I trained at St. Andrew's College. That's the theological seminary for the United Church on the Prairies. Mm-hmm. I was there for a long time. I also did my undergraduate degree there as well. So I was in Saskatoon for about a decade.
Yeah.
It was very, very good formation at St. Andrew's. It's a really good college, had excellent faculty. I think most people say that their theological college is very similar. So we all are prejudiced to where we went.
Yeah, just a little bit.
That's right. But St. Andrew's is very good. It's also, it's part of the Saskatoon Theological Union. So we also study with Anglicans and Lutherans as well. So it was very good formation there.
I was just going to interrupt you just half a second there, but I know a number of people who have come through also the Doctor of Ministry program with rural church emphases, which of course, small church, rural church seems to really have worked well together, and Cam Harder for a number of years leading that, and just a very good program. So anyways, I'll allow my bias to say you probably had a good school that you went to.
Well, if you say it's good, then I don't mind the instruction at all. And in the final year of my studies, we have an exchange program with our sister college in South Korea, Hanshin Seminary. Oh. And I was one day I was cornered by my worship professor, who's only about 5 feet tall, but she's very intimidating on that day. And she said, they've sent 2 students to us. We need to send students to them now.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So I was sent to go to Hanshin, and then one of those students that I mentioned that they had sent to us, I'd known her for a year. And then when I was in Hanshin for a semester, then the 2 of us started to date, and we've ended up being married today. So my spouse, Reverend Mian Kim, she's also in ministry, and she's out in Fort Macleod, which is just 30 minutes west of where we are now. But that exchange semester was really good because I just had only had my experiences of the prairies, which is very good, very formative as well. Like the years in university, I would go back to summer. I'd go back to my home Medicine Hat. I worked in the nitrogen fertilizer plant there. Mm-hmm. I think I gained, just as much experience doing that kind of labor every year as I did in the classroom as well. Very, very formative also.
Oh, yes.
But then it came time for internship when I was sent to Northern Alberta. I went to Two Hills, Alberta, which is a Ukrainian-Canadian community. It was an excellent, excellent place to go. It really is a place that's formed itself as sort of its mission is preparing people for ministry, because they can't afford full-time ministry, so they just cycle through having students. And then, like all of us who have been interns at Two Hills, when we meet each other at conferences, we all say to each other, you know, I am happy where I'm at now, but there is no church like Two Hills. It really was the best place.
Mhm.
So Two Hills was excellent. When I completed my internship and was ordained, my wife and I went back to Korea for 2 years while she was going to be doing the internship process. We
Ah,
said that we would spend that time in Korea. So for 2 years, the two of us worked in separate churches in Seoul, the capital city.
mhm.
Uh, Huge, gigantic churches. Both of our churches had over 2,000 members in them. So very, very different than my experience in Two Hills, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but then when my wife received her permanent residency, we returned back to Canada and we took churches again back in rural Alberta. We've Because of our formation at St. Andrew's College, we think this is our duty, is just to serve your time, just like the RCMP. You go out to a rural area first.
Mhm.
So we went to Kitscoty, and Marwayne was my two churches, and my
Okay.
wife's was Edgerton and Paradise Valley, and that's just kind of near Lloydminster, just on the Alberta side.
Yeah, yeah.
So just as the pandemic was beginning, I had to leave, unfortunately, because one of my churches ran out of money, so they couldn't support full-time ministry anymore. So we were on the move. So just as the pandemic was beginning, like, they interviewed us at the church I'm at now, and the day we were at the hotel, there was a wedding reception, and the next day the hotel was abandoned.
Shut down, yeah.
It was very, they took us on the tour of the city, and then they're like, well, there's no cars at all on the road. Well, normally it's busy, they said. But not the case. So now that's where I'm at now. I'm in Southminster United Church, which is in downtown Lethbridge. And my wife continues to serve in rural ministry. She's in Fort Macleod, as I mentioned, 30 minutes to the east. So that's sort of been my journey to where I'm at today.
Well, your journey during the COVID years reminds me of some of the interviews that I've done over this last while, as we've talked about the COVID years and small churches dealing with just so much. I think weirdness might be a good way to describe it. And even as I'm thinking of it, I have there's a pastor who's currently moving to a new position from here in Kindersley. And some of us have asked, well, how long have you been here? 5 years. And we say, no, it can't be. But, take out 3 years for COVID and the pandemic. And
Yeah.
it's like he was only here 2 years, but it's been 5 years. I don't know if you've experienced some of that too.
For sure. It's like the time is both long and short in the pandemic. So I'm coming up to my 3 years here in Southminster, and it feels like I'm still the new minister here, because like people have only seen me in person for just a little bit over a year. So
Yeah.
it's that's got some benefits to it, that when you're sort of long tenured already at 3 years, and then I'm still new, so people are more forgiving still. So
But that brings us in part to the question today of how denominations are faring in Canada. I think, and I'll let you run with this, but my sense is that a lot of what has happened with denominations was accelerated over COVID. And maybe you
yes,
can explain some of where you see denominations going and how that's faring.
absolutely. Um, I have a colleague I was just chatting with this week, actually. And she said that the pandemic has accelerated all the trends that were already there by 5 years. Everything's been advanced 5 years in those
Mhm.
trends. That's what she sort of guesses. I'd sort of say that's probably the case. So within the United Church, we did a big restructuring just prior to the pandemic. We sort of recognized, we have this governance structure that has existed for very close to 100 years now. It was very suitable in the 1920s,
Mhm.
not very nimble in today's society for the needs that the church experiences in the 21st century. So we had a massive, massive reorganization, and very much to the benefit. I think I was a major supporter of it. I wanted us to go this direction. People complain because there's growing pains when you change the structure like that. But it was very necessary to make ourselves a more suitable polity and governance for the coming years. However, just 1 year into the new governance structures, the pandemic arrived. So the greatest test that they could possibly face was just thrust upon them. So it has been hard. Like, what people complain. Oh, why isn't anyone helping us? Just like, well, I don't know if the old structure had been in place, do you think you would have received more or less support? So I don't know. I'm not sure. But it's been very challenging. For denominational churches, like, we have our wider church to rely upon in a big crisis like that. Like, we have reserve funds, we have organizational structures that check in on all of our congregations. So, like, that's where a denomination really has a lot of robust strength, is in a moment like that. Like, people criticize the structure of denominations because, like, the handcuffs that it puts on people. But, like, that's really where a denomination is very helpful, is that it in those crises like that, like, it's especially in an individual church, like, when things go off the rails, as they unfortunately do, there's someone that can step in and they just say, okay, let's sort of right the ship here. So the denomination has proved itself that it still has some use, but going forward, there are major challenges. Absolutely. I've been one that has really made my feelings known quite directly. During the pandemic, the United Church had one of our general council meetings. Right. That's where we decide everything nationally. And through my regional council, I sent a motion to general council that said, okay, it's time to start talking with other similar denominations, Anglicans, Evangelical, Lutheran Church in Canada, Presbyterians. We got to start chatting about full organic union. Because if we start talking about it now, by the time we do all the negotiations in about a decade or more, we'll have reached the crisis point. So that motion was passed at the general council meeting. So it had 80% support. So people think that I'm onto something, obviously. Yeah. But I don't know how the progress on it's been very slow. I think it's just it's, if you're starting to date, we'll take you out to the malt shop sort of thing. So I know, like, the moderator and the primate to the Anglican Church, they're starting to do stuff together, but, like, the really, like, hard negotiation about theology and property and worship, like, all that, we're not even ready to begin those conversations yet.
Okay. So in your mind, what would that full organic union, if you want to call it, look like?
Well, not unlike our own United Church Union, we're sort of the model for it, because we've done it 98 years ago with Methodists, Presbyterians, and Congregationalists. So we have chatted with the Anglicans twice before in our history about also having a union. Both of those fell through. So we'll see if doing it a third time, whether that's productive or not. I think it's worth the pursuit, but because I just think that, like, it's not just between us mainline Protestants. I think for all of Christianity is going to start coalescing over the coming decades, just because of the dwindling resources we're all facing. So it's going to sort of crystallize into Roman Catholics will be their own thing, but we'll probably see, like, a mainline Protestant unified denomination, probably a unified evangelical denomination, Orthodoxers, and then some sort of Pentecostal denomination. I imagine that's what Christianity is going to look like in the coming decades. It's probably into those 5. I won't call them even denominations, like federations.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess that which is part of the discussion here is a lot with names and how we name ourselves. Um, is there a new name that's going to come instead of calling 5 groups denominations? And you've already implied maybe some other name, and names imply then how it looks. What would you see as possibly name or a name for that type of thing?
Like I would say that breaks down on the amount of authority that we give to those governing bodies.
Yeah.
Like in the United Church, we're sort of at the halfway point where, like for our regional council, we give them authority to be sort of a resource to us. But like they don't have the authority to come into our church and say, oh, this person's no longer the pastor here. They're out. I'm moving them over to this other place instead. But like in a Roman Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran church, like that is very
Yeah.
much the case. The bishop has that authority to just come in and say that. So as we go forward into, I'll roll with that federation name.
Okay. Yeah.
It's about how much authority people entering into those unions, how much authority they want to give to the structure. Like it has pluses and minuses. Like to give a lot of authority means things are work very efficient. People like the sort of our stereotype within the United Church is that, oh, we're so absurdly bureaucratic. We got to have committees for this and fill out 1 million forms. But that's sort of been born out of our history as the United Church, in that to make our union work between our denominations, we had to make sure, oh, are you okay with that? Are you okay with this? So to be very representative requires this great deal of bureaucracy as well.
Oh, okay. So restructuring in the last few years, why would you why did that happen? Okay, I've some idea, but
well, it goes back really to the founding of the United Church about what should be the size of the middle court between the national general council and then the local church. And everyone belongs to that middle court of organization. And they couldn't agree about the size of it. Presbyterians wanted something smaller, about 15 churches.
Yeah.
Methodists had things bigger, call it conference, and that was like 100 churches. Well, we can't agree, so we're going to just do both, they said. So we'll belong to a presbytery, but then you also belong to a conference as well. And then they sort of divided the powers about who does what, who has what responsibility, not unlike the provincial government and the federal government in Canada. That was fine. That worked for most of our history because we had the people to populate committees to do that work. That's not the case anymore. It's the resources are so much less. We can't afford to have meetings as frequently. We don't have people to serve on committees. So we really had to downsize in that regard. But like, I think it's just beyond like the scarcity of resources also. Like fundamentally, people just said, whatever was the compromise that was required in 1925, that doesn't matter anymore. We just only need one middle court of government, the regional council, as we call it today. We only need that. And then just make sure that single court works more effectively.
Now, within the group that I work with, Small Church Connections, we're attempting to start a small church network, but not necessarily a denomination, not necessarily, but defining different groups and resource groups. How does a denomination? Okay, so how do you see a federation and groups that are outside the federation but nevertheless contributing to the federation? How would you see that working?
Right. So in the new structure of the United Church, we built that into it, is that we have what we call clusters and networks now.
Okay.
And to operate in that way, they don't have any like official role in the governance. They can send a proposal on, I suppose, but like they don't vote on things. But like that's how networks work in the United Church. I don't see how that couldn't work cross denominational boundaries as well. like if you say you want to have a network of rural churches on the
Mhm.
Canadian prairies,
Right. Yeah.
who cares if that one is like they're Lutherans and they're Baptists? Like it truly, we're meeting together. We're talking about the common issues that we're facing, the resources that we want to share. Like you can just, as long as your denomination has the allows for that kind of
Yeah.
openness, like that's where it's going to happen. Just it's going to be out of necessity, really.
Mhm. I
Like
think,
the
yeah.
Go
I,
ahead.
I mean,
Sorry.
I look at our local church ministerial, and I sort of see that as that type of feder, well, networking type of thing.
Mhm.
Very effective. The group actually gets together to pray, and they get together once a week. Quite unusual, but nevertheless very helpful. But yeah, it's not. There's no denomination requiring that, asking for that, and no organization
Mhm.
in that sense. But I don't think some of our pastors would survive without that in this town.
Mhm. Uh,
So yeah.
and like as I mentioned earlier, going to school in Saskatoon with these folks from the other colleges,
Mhm.
like the neighbors around me in ministry, I know these people. I went to school with them for a decade. Like I know who they are, so they're not strangers. So like we can chat about whatever we want to do together. Like in the ministerial here in Lethbridge, I went to school with my colleague that's just 3 blocks away at the Lutheran church.
Mhm.
Um, like who's gonna say that we can't do stuff together? Who's gonna stop us? Like we're already acquaintances with one another to begin with.
Mhm. So let's address the question. I mean, you've talked about 5 possible federations from Catholic.
That's sort of what I would imagine things
Yeah,
would
yeah,
coalesce in.
I think that tends to come back to theology, doctrine, and belief, that type of thing. How do you see that working in okay in the Canadian scene? Well, I'll just let you run with some of that whole area.
Mhm. Um, like I think we're temporarily at an impasse because
Hmm.
the sort of the issue that separates people within Canada currently is issue around like the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
So whether people want to be inclusive or whether people are exclusive of that community, that seems to be the defining issue of the moment. I do not think that that will last beyond the current generation. Like for the millennials and for the Gen Z folks, I just don't think that that would end up being what will drive the engine of deciding whom they worship with.
Mhm.
So it's hard to see past that because like that's like for the United Church, we decided that very early, like before Canadian society was sort of where it's at on those issues, and we majorly took the hit for it. Currently, it's really tearing some denominations apart. Like our sister denomination in the United States, the Methodist Church, like they're going to split. They're going to
Yeah.
have a physical split to their
Yes, they
denomination.
are.
So like it's so hard to guess about what the future is going to look like until that issue is resolved for so many denominations. So like it's theology is always very important. Like people downplay its importance, but it truly is very
Yeah. Yeah.
important. Worship style is going to be another thing that sort of separates people out. So if you're very highly liturgical, very low liturgical, like that's going to also be the factor. So it's gonna be between those quadrants. I'd probably sort of say it between the high or low worship and then left and right sort of theology, and
Mhm.
then people sort of coalesce
There's
into those quadrants.
there as I know note within denominations that a Pentecostal style or Pentecostal seems to be the growing denominational group, if you want to put it that way. Why is that as compared to the rest of us, if you want to put it that way? And okay, I sort of have some Pentecostal leanings. I sort of have some other leanings, evangelical. So what's with the Pentecostals?
Well, I think I can answer this
Okay.
somewhat confidently, and that comes from my experience in Korea. Within global Christianity outside of Western churches, like Pentecostalism is really growing, and it's very much so in Korea as well. Like even our partner denomination, the Presbyterian Church there, like they're very, very Pentecostal. Like we in the United Church, we are very not.
Yeah.
That's fine. Like I can admit that of ourselves. Like we're like to a point of discomfort even, but like not hostility, but just that's not who our identity is. That's fine. But the Korean church, like they have latched onto that so much so. Like the biggest congregation in the world is the Yoido Full Gospel Pentecostal Church in
Exactly.
Seoul.
Yeah.
Really, I think a lot of that is it's sort of personality driven for a lot of those churches. Like again, a very charismatic pastor. People sort of find an attraction to that, and I think that's where I would see for most of the churches around the world, like that really has given them a lot of strength. That they can find strength in a single person that has a charismatic appeal, and that allows their church to grow. That has pluses and minuses.
Oh yeah, definitely.
For sure. Like the church that I served can very much be classified into that in Korea. That is, like we had a very excellent pastor build a huge church, 2,000. Like it was just a small little church of 40 people when he started there. Now 2,000 people. And that takes work. Like people dismiss that far too easily in Canada. Like, oh, that they're just very superficial Christianity. Like, no, it takes a lot of work to build a huge sort of organization like that.
Yeah.
So it's good that people are able to find that success. There's also great negatives to it thankfully not my church, but like that Yoido Full Gospel Church I mentioned. Oh, the pastor retires. Well, who's going to be the next pastor? Oh, it's his son. Well, then it sort of becomes like a monarchy of the church. And then like, oh, and we still pay this big giant stipend to the former pastor as well. So like, is this what God is calling us to do with our money? Is to make sure that this retired pastor is a millionaire? So within Canada, like because Canada is an immigrant nation, like that, it's those immigrant churches that are the ones that are growing. Within Canada, and like that flavor of Christianity as well is having the most success. Like mainline Christianity, we're really taking it on the chin. It's been a real rough past 30 years, basically most of my life. It's been nonstop decline. So, and no sign when that hemorrhaging is going to ease up.
Well, I hate to say it, but the time has sort of rushed by way too quickly here, and I have a lot more questions, but well, I really appreciated the chat and just getting some sense of where you're seeing denominations going and federations and union, and of course United Church 1925. They pioneered a lot of this in Canada, and looking 100 years later, I think we need to I think we all need to look at and see where things are at, and you've touched on a number of those issues. And once again, I will promote your book to help us understand.
I'll put it on the screen.
Have you got a piece there? Oh, look
there
at
it
that.
is.
Beautiful. Yes. Great. A great introduction for many people who maybe just don't understand the denomination called the United Church in Canada. I think you've outlined that very well, and helps us.
And that's like a resource like this demonstrates the strength of a denomination, because we have centralized resource in the United Church Publishing House that puts a document like that out, that here's this resource for the whole church, draws upon the expertise of people across Canada. So that's I don't think denominations are dead yet, because we can still do things like that together as a group. So
yeah. Again, thank you very much. And I guess I could go on and on with thanks and all that sort of stuff and all that, but I'm going to say we're done. So, Taylor, this has been great. I thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you, Ron, for having me. And I'll just say for my closing remarks regarding denominations, the United Church often is sort of categorized as, oh, it's very shallow in its theology. Like, a lot of that came to us because we had to make our United Church Union work. We had to be very loose to our theology. I think that going forward, that's going to be the case, is that, if we just turtle ourselves into our own theology, we're not going to make it. We're just going to shrink and die. It's having openness to work with others in these sort of networks that you've mentioned, that is going to give us the resilience to survive the challenges we face in the coming decades.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron.